Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside The War, Europe, 1939 to 1945. This is a game designed by Ernie Copley and is published by Compass Games. Well, this is a really giant box. There's a lot of goodness in this, and Ernie's got The War, Europe, and now recently released The War of the Pacific. So now you can fight the entire war together, which is pretty cool. But this is the first in the series, The War, Europe. We'll also be taking a look at the expansion for The War Europe in a future video. So let's take a look at the back of the box and see what this game's all about. The War, Europe 1939 to 1945 is Compass Games' new World War II strategic level game combining the best features of the genre into an intuitive, challenging new game. While offering all the expansive features of the World War II monster game genre, such as U-boat warfare, diplomacy, espionage, strategic bombing, jets, rockets, and numerous variants for each major power, The War also offers scenarios of unprecedented scope. Players can explore a huge array of what-ifs, such as what if Germany had won the Stalingrad campaign? What if D-Day had been launched a year earlier? What if Germany had developed strategic bombers like the American B-17? The War offers the serious World War II history buff the chance to refight all the major campaigns of the European theater in a realistic historical context. But even for strategy gamers who care more about pure gaming fun than historical simulations, The War offers scenarios that can be learned quickly and played in an evening. Luck is important in The War, but superior strategy even more so. Although the game is the result of extensive research by its designer, it is not intended to be a pure simulation. Instead, you will find a gamer's game with user-friendly combat systems on land, in the air, and at sea. From the convoy battles in the Arctic to the struggle for the North African desert, The War is both realistic and playable. If you want a rewarding challenge for the gaming veteran and pure gaming fun for the novice, The War is a game to own. And at the top we have an example of the map and the counters down the left side. Playing time is up to 8 hours or so for the scenarios and 40 hours for the full campaign. Complexity is 7 out of 10, solitaire suitability is 7 out of 10, and the contents we get 1800 5/8 inch counters and two 22 by 34 inch maps. So let's take a look inside and see what we get. All right, we get 2 decks of cards, 2d10, got a bundle here, which is probably the rulebook and playbook and player aids. Some more player aids in this bundle. A whole lot of counter sheets, all shrink wrapped. And then our maps. So let's set up the maps and take a closer look at the game. And here's a look at the map that comes with the game. It is a beautifully done map. Both of the maps will just marry up nice and even, and you'll have a good sized playing area, but not a giant sized playing area. It's got a monster game style feel to it, but it does not have a monster game style footprint, which is fantastic. We've got several boxes around the map. At the top, we've got box for Canada, United States, bombing war and the U-boat war, Narvik, Murmansk, the Urals. Then at the bottom right, we have Kuwait, India, Italian East Africa, and then South Africa here. We have Azores box here, and then along the bottom left, we've got 4 different season tracks from 1939, start in the fall to the end in the summer 1945. Beneath that, we have 2 different tracks. The top one is for SMPs, which are your strategic movement points, heavy flak and rail moves track, and then at the bottom we have the victory points track. All the information you need on keeping track of the different things that you'll be using right on the map, and it's, like I said, a beautifully done map, nice size hexes, going to be nice size counters, should be very easy to read on the table, and slap some plexi down, you'll be good to go. This is going to make a great presentation on the table. Next, we'll take a look at the player aids that come with the game, and there are a bunch. First off, we've got the Italian forces. You see it says first rate, second rate, and third rate. This is going to be the rating of each of your units under air, naval, and army. And as you can see, the Italians only have a very limited amount of first-rate units. The majority are going to be second and third rate. Beneath that, we have German naval construction and the different locations for the construction, and then the same here at the bottom for the Italian naval construction. And we see likewise for the Allied forces, U.S. forces along the left-hand side, British, French, and the Soviets, and then we have the U.S. entry level to get into the war from 1 through 13, and after that, the U.S. will enter the war. Next, we have the German setup sheet. We have the at-start units, then we have 1939 through 1945, and at the bottom right, we have all the information as to what your starting NARFs, growth rate, SMPs, air bases, fortifications, pops, synthetic fuel plants, and rail moves will be. And we have that same information for the French at the bottom, and when you flip it over, you'll have the Italian information at the top. Then we have the British player mat, the Soviet Union player mat, and the United States player mat. Next, we have the terrain effects chart, which gives a graphical representation of the different types of terrain, the name, the effects on movement, as well as the effects on combat in the right-hand column. Then we have the naval construction sheet for the Allies, including all the ports for the British, US, Soviets, and the French. Then we have the minor countries force pool, allowing us to keep track of all the forces for the minor countries. Then we have tables for the NARFs for the Western Allies, the Soviets, the neutral and sympathizer, as well as the Axis at the bottom. The NARFs are going to be your currency used in the game. These are used to purchase diplomatic or military offensives, build ground, air, or naval units, and upgrade the quality of your forces. Then we have a cardstock fold-out that you're going to be using for the Errata. On the front, we have 3 different tables that will replace the tables in the charts and tables book. What I notice is they're only giving you 1 column of data. The same information is in the charts and tables book. The difference is it also has a second column, and instead of just saying ignore the second column, they wanted to make sure that you had the exact information that you needed, so there was no confusion as to left or right column as to one to ignore. So it's not like it's something massive that you can't ignore on your own in the rules, but it's good to have those. Inside, we've got the errata that's going to tell you what words or what sentences to replace here throughout the rulebook, and that's actually not a bad bit of errata when you consider this is a 120-page rulebook, so not too bad at all to have that errata, but it's good to have it on hand in the game. And lastly, we're going to take a quick look through the scenario sequence of play cards for each of the scenarios. These are going to be a little bit different because there is a book with the scenario information in it. These are kept on separate individual player aid cards, so that way you can have it out on the table instead of having a book out in front of you and looking through it, because the sequence of play is going to be different for each scenario. Some are going to be shorter than others. Obviously, the longer the game is, the campaign games are going to be a longer sequence of play. This one here is Scenario 2, Norway 1940. The sequence of play is going to be the front of the sheet. Likewise, on the back, we have Scenario 7 for Barbarossa 1941. This also will be a single sequence of play sheet. Then we get into the longer sequence of play. This is for Scenario 10, Campaign Game 1942 to 1943. We have the front sheet, as well as the back of the sheet. Then we have the same for Scenario 11, the campaign game of 1941 to 1945. And that is the back of the sheet. And finally, Scenario 12, which is the full campaign game, 1939 to 1945. This is the front of the sheet. And this is the back of the sheet. And looking through the rest of the scenarios, we have Scenario 1, Poland 1939. You can see it's a very short sequence of play card. The same on the left-hand side for Scenario 4, Atlantic Lifeline 1939 to 1945. And the sequence of play expands once we get into Scenario 3, France 1940. Again, it's only a single sheet, but it is longer than the shorter one we saw, Poland 1939. Then we have Scenario 5, Regia Marina 1940 to 1943, a single sheet. Scenario 6, North Africa 1941 to 1943. Scenario 8, D-Day to VE Day 1944 to 1945. And then Scenario 9, Bolshevik Hordes 1944 to 1945. And we'll take a look at a few examples of the cards that come with the game. These are optional. They're not required for play, but this will give you an extra layer of depth in various aspects of the game. We have espionage and counter-espionage for the Germans, espionage and counter-espionage for the Americans. And below that, you see examples of each of the cards that you can use in the game using the optional rules. There are also optional cards for naval combat, anti-submarine warfare, and U-boats and raiders. And lastly, we have interceptors and strategic air command. Again, these are optional rules that you can use to add extra layers of complexity in the game. Next, we'll take a look at the counter sheets that come with the game. There are 11 counter sheets. Remember, 1,800 5/8 inch counters in this game. So a lot of counters that you're going to have to put in that big box. Starting off with the first sheet, we have British forces as well as the British administrative counters. On the second sheet, we have the same counter manifest for the US forces, the Soviets. On the fourth counter sheet, we have the French forces along with the remainder of the Soviet administrative counters. Counter sheet 5, we have a mix of Allied counters. Counter sheet 6, we get to the German forces. That continues on to counter sheet 7. On the next sheet, we have the Italian forces as well as the remainder of the German administrative markers. On the next sheet, we have the minor powers, then the remainder of the minor powers as well as some administrative counters. And then we finish it out with the final sheet of administrative counters. Next, we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 120-page full-color rulebook. On the inside of front cover starts off with the index, and that's going to go for a couple pages. But before we look any further, I want to point out the color coding alongside each of the different segments of the rulebook. Look at green for introduction. You're going to see that here in a few seconds, and that's going to be used to find the different sections of the rulebook quicker just by looking at the color coding. We get to the introduction, and you see the green at the top right as well as top left. So that way you can find, like I said, you can find the different sections that much faster. Start off with the number of players, then we get into the definitions in use throughout the rules. Game components, the map, the counters, they're all going to be explained to you. That continues on, and then we get to the sequence of play, and that's going to break down all segments of the sequence of play. And remember, the sequence of play is going to be variable based on the scenario or the campaign that you're playing. I'm not going to dig deep into this rule book because it's 120 pages, so that we'd be here a long time. So I just want to flip through it pretty quick so that way you can see the different sections in it. Strategic warfare, strategic bombing, and you've got the charts. You've also got a charts and table booklet, which we're going to look at, but this is going to have all the charts and tables that are appropriate for that section of the rules that you're reading at the time. And then, of course, you can use the ones from the book when you're referencing them during the game. Naval operations, patrols, naval interception. There's some more tables. Naval air and naval combat. Depleted fleets, naval nationality. We've got an illustrated example here. We've got task forces, strategic movement, your strat moves. When we looked at the map, you saw the strat moves track. That's what that's for, the SMPs. And we have strategic movement, air and para units, other limits and special cases, strategic movement capacity, ground unit movement. And we've got another illustrated example here. Actually, a few of them here on the left-hand side. Reserves, and then we get into ground combat, conducting ground operations, more charts, constraints on ground units and special cases, advancing after combat, retreating, effects of terrain on ground combat, and we've got this all laid out for you here, the terrain effects chart which we saw. This is going to give you detailed explanations as well as an illustrated example about the terrain effects on combat. Then we have air operations, air unit movement, offensive air support, defensive air support, counter-air missions, carriers and carrier naval air components, guidelines for intercepting enemy air missions, flak, airborne operations, supply lines, supply for airborne drops and exploiting units, supply line length and capacity, and supply for amphibious landings, overseas supply, fortress supply, a lot of supply stuff. Static units and fortresses, national resource factors. Remember the NARFs, that's going to be your currency that you're going to use to do different aspects of the game. Then you have your year start income, the minor country NARFs, conquests and NARFs, conquered major powers, building and repairing units, one of the things you're going to be using your NARFs for, and it's going to give you the production cost table there. Then we have diplomacy and espionage. Remember, we looked at those optional cards that you can use for those different segments. Diplomatic status, termination of diplomacy, special case terms of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, then optional rule variants, national rules for Britain, British prestige in the Med, British surrender role, and then the British surrender modifiers, surrender effects, national rules for France, Morale, French surrender, armistice terms offered to France, effects of German occupation, Vichy France, and then we have national rules for Italy, national rules for Germany, national rules for the USSR, and then national rules for the United States. Minor countries, colonies, and occupied areas are covered here. I'm going to flip through this real quick because the book is kind of starting to flip up a little. We're getting towards the end. And these are the minor countries. Then we get to partisans, partisan Europe, partisans and SS legions, partisan effects, partisans in combat, weather. We've got weather on the Eastern Front, which is always going to be a major effect on combat, Western European winter weather, and then victory. Objectives, and we have some more optional variants. Allied variants there, Soviets, US variants, and additional optional rules, force march, German elite units. Pilot and aircrew training, Transylvania. I guess Dracula is going to make an appearance in the game. Simplified U-boat war, U-boats and ASW cards. Remember, we talked about those cards. We looked at them. That's how you're going to be using them here with the optional rules. Simplified strategic bombing rules, and then strategic bombing and interceptor cards. Naval combat cards, strategic warfare in the Med, sub-hunters, optional U-boat attrition, U-boats and cap ships, and then we have German motorized flak, carpet bombing, and then bomber waves, and the siege of Leningrad. And that is the end of the 120-page rulebook. Next, we'll take a look through the charts and tables. This is a 40-page full-color rulebook. Inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents, which is going to list down all the different areas of the book. You've got strategic warfare, diplomacy, naval and air, partisans, ground combat, U.S. entry, surrender modifiers and victory, weather, minor countries, production costs, and then the worksheets that you're going to be using for the game. And we'll just flip through here all of the charts and tables, which we've seen these when we look through the rule book, but now they're going to be all compiled into one book so you can more easily find it rather than trying to look through the rules for that specific rule and find that chart or table that you saw when you were reading through the rule book. It's going to make it easier when you're playing to just look through it. Then we have the NARF annual income worksheets for the French, the British, Soviets, US, Italians, Germans, the French, the British, the diplomatic record sheets, Soviets and US, Italian and German, and then the variant tracking record for the French and the British, the Soviets and the US, and then the Italians and the Germans. And then we finish off with the production cost table on the back of the charts and table book. And lastly, we'll take a look at the scenario book. This is a 36-page full-color book. We have the different scenarios in the game here. Poland 1939, Norway 1940, France 1940, the Atlantic Lifeline 39 to 45, Regia Marina 40 to 43, North Africa, Barbarossa 41, D-Day to VE Day 44 to 45, Bolshevik Hordes 44 to 45, and then the three different campaign games 42, 43, 41 to 45, and then the whole smash 39 to 45. And you can see the layout for the scenario here for the Polish scenario. France 1940 and Norway 1940. And remember, we looked at the sequence of play. It was very small. You can see here the same thing. It's very small. The scenario information is. Then we have the Atlantic Lifeline 39 to 45. And just like the rule book, you notice it's color-coded. So you can just look at either side and find the scenario that you're looking for. Regia Marina, North Africa, Barbarossa, D-Day to VE Day, Bolshevik Hordes, the campaign game 42-43, and that's going to be a little bit more involved than we saw with the other scenarios. Scenario 11, campaign game 41 to 45, be even more involved. And then the full campaign 39 to 45. And then we have the designer's notes, the war's ancestry, the war in history, logistics, diplomacy, strategic warfare, strategy and operations, orders of battle, builds, replayability, scenarios, and then player's notes for each of the countries. So that way you have, some hints when you want to get into the game. You have a little bit here from the designer, Ernie Copley, and then that finishes out the back of the scenario book. And that is a look at everything you get inside of The War, Europe, 1939 to 1945. This is a game designed by Ernie Copley and published by Compass Games. This is a big game. As you can see, 11 counter sheets. Look at all these player aids, 2 decks of cards for optional rules, and a 120-page rulebook, beautifully done map. This is just a really high-quality game, and there's a lot of content in here. Like I said, 120 pages of rules, and about 20, maybe 30 pages, somewhere in that range. That's optional rules and variants. So it's not just 120 pages of rules just for the base game. You do have plenty of optional rules and variants, like including these cards we talked about. This will add extra layers of complexity. You can use them or not use them, however you choose to play. There's even some notes in there on how to handle different situations when playing solitaire, because we all primarily play solitaire, and a game like this is not going to need a giant footprint. So that's a great thing. You're going to get a big game, a kind of a mini monster game, but you're not going to have a monster setup where you need 4x6 tables or anything like that. You're going to be able to easily fit this on your table. Now the charts and tables, that's going to need some extra space, so you probably will need to set up another smaller table next to it. But a lot of game in this box, and really looks like it's going to be interesting. You can play the smaller scenarios, which will only take you a few hours, or you can be ambitious and play any of the 3 grand campaigns. So you've got plenty of game, plenty of history to explore in The War, Europe, 1939 to 1945. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you'd be curious about this one. You have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.